What's the strangest, scariest thing you've seen in the middle of the night? See estimate 4075 said. I live in a ground-level studio. My bed is near the window. I reached to turn off the bedside lamp and saw someone in a white hoodie through the gap in the blinds. I went with the hell and moved closer to get a better look and hopefully scare the creeper off. The person in the hoodie aggressively moved closer and put his face directly into the blind gap. I jumped back and he ran away. Installed a security camera the next day. Little Hobbit said. Woke one night when I was about 5 years old. Was gazing around the room for a bit. I looked at the window and there, staring wide-eyed at me, was a man. Hands pressed against the window, just staring with his head cocked to the side. Didn't even flinch when I noticed him. I hid under the covers, then peeked out to see if he moved. He was still there. I decided to just stay under the covers. I don't know why I didn't scream. Logicus Perplexing said. Something similar happened to my stepdad. He and his brother shared a room growing up that had a skylight in it, and one night he ran to his dad's room several times to tell him a man was up there looking in their room. After the third time being woken up, his dad goes to look, and sure enough, a grown-ass man laying on his stomach watching two small boys sleeping. Canadian 78 said. I had the same reaction, but I was like 14. There was a power outage, and when power came on I was in the sunken basement playing video games. Then, like you, I had the urge to look at the window. In the crack of the screen was a man looking at me. I was too terrified to do anything except pretend I didn't notice. Then I ran upstairs and told my dad. Our dog was let out and went and smelled around the window he was at and went to follow around the side of the house when my dad called the dog back. Policeman said it's normal around power outages as security systems are off. 6th and Elm said. In university I worked as a standardized patient for the medical school to earn extra cash. It was usually pretty heavy psych cases like sexual assault, attempted suicide or severe mental illnesses, where we'd act a part of the patient and the student learned to deal with these subjects before encountering them in real life for the first time. I had one role that was a teen schizophrenia case with terrifying symptoms. When my character looked at a window at night, she saw faces pressed up against it. If she was alone in a dark room, she'd hear someone talking in her ear. Watching TV and the news person started talking to her. I'd be freaked out all that night, and that was just from pretending to see someone at the window. I can't believe a large portion of humanity has to deal with that. People are so brave. Pukes said. About 3 a.m. on a deserted highway, I drove by what looked like a body wrapped in a white sheet, discarded on the median. I took the next exit, drove back and took that exit, and came back. Paused it and parked a little ways up. It still looked like a body wrapped in a sheet. Got out to go look closer when I heard loud rustling in the scrub trees of the median, so jumped in my truck and drove off. Pre-cell phone, so I didn't call police. I looked in the papers but never saw anything. When I posted this before, I got chastised about being reckless. I know. Toothpastenichus said. I'm going to preface this with the important detail that all of the garages in the neighborhood that I grew up in were detached from the houses. Until I was about 12, my bedroom was on the ground floor of our house and my parents' room was right across the hall. We had a dog, Oreo, that we adopted when I was 2. When she was about 5 and I was about 7, she went blind. Around that time, she became the world's best watchdog, and this is why I believe that. It was the middle of winter when I was maybe 9 or 10, and there was snow on the ground. It was a quiet night. Oreo was restless, and we didn't know why. Her hearing seemed to improve immensely since she lost her vision, and she would bark at kids playing down the road or the mailman 2 houses down. But it was close to midnight at this point, and the neighborhood was asleep. Oreo wasn't. She barked at our back door and scratched at it like someone was taunting her. Oreo paced from my room, to my parents' room, to the back door, again and again and again. It woke me and my mom up, and my mom finally got up and followed Oreo to the back door and coaxed her back to bed. Toothpastenichus said. The following morning, we wake up to some terrifying news. Our neighbors across the street lost their garage in a fire. The empty house for sale behind them completely burned down. The grown-ups around me are throwing around the word arson, and my mom explains to me that someone burned down the empty house, then our neighbor's garage. The police were following footprints in the snow. They never found who did it. Years later, My mom told me the rest. The footprints weren't lost after my neighbor's house. The footprints continued across the street, past our back door, and right through the narrow walkway between our garage and my room. Then they backtrack to the street and disappear. I don't know if the arsonist would have burnt our house or garage at night, but either way, Oreo woke us up and I think they knew that. She passed away last year at 16 and I miss her every day. She was my best friend and she never let anything happen to us, ever. Drakmanka said. Stories like these are why I always take my pets seriously when they get protective. I don't have a dog now, but when I was a kid we had a miniature poodle who thought he was a Rottweiler. Ultra protective. Had a special bark for when something really made his spidey senses go off. He always barked at everything he thought was an intruder, but those were more hey barks. This was a watch out, be careful barks. Right now I have a guard cat. She patrols the house every night and checks the windows constantly. She comes and gets me if she feels I need to see something during the day, and I have zero doubt she would wake me if she felt something was wrong at night. Guard pets equals peace of mind. Mad Morta said. Oh man, I actually had forgotten about this, but my original Xbox scared the ever-living shit out of me once. As an adult, I left my original Xbox plugged in and idling on the home screen, and went to sleep. I woke up later to hear ghostly voices mumbling and talking to each other coming from the TV. It sounded just like EVP from those crappy ghost shows, where you can hear its voices but not what it's really saying. And to top it all off, over the voices were scary mechanical sound effects and spooky music. I have never, and I mean never, left an Xbox idling since. The explanation is Microsoft thought it would be neat to use some free astronaut transmissions for their futuristic console, and wanted space music to go with it. Here's a video of what happens if you let the Xbox idle. You can skip to 9 o'clock for creepy sounds and 9:30 for some voices. https://youtube.be/wibi6i5adwq. Homies Trismegistus said. Man, I saw something once in the woods. I have heard about ball lightning a lot, but part of me is skeptical. I think there's something else that also can do this that's not ball lightning. Maybe paranormal, maybe not. In the woods I was alone with the fire, just with my thoughts. And I look up in the dead silence, like I started to get sort of freaked out. It was really quiet. And I saw 6 blue lights. They were about the size of basketballs. They looked like hikers with flashlights far in the distance, and that's what I thought they were because it could explain the silence. But as I kept looking, I could see how far they were based off of being in front of, or behind trees. Just eerily silent, and they were floating about 3 feet off the ground just in between the trees. I watched them for about 30 minutes, it was a while, and I was fucking terrified. They were not far away. About 20-30 FT. I was even thinking about ball lightning due to seeing every single person to ever exist saying that on every single thread ever that is like this. I don't think it was ball lightning. It wasn't hiker flashlights, because it was dead silent and right next to me. And they one by one went out, as if they were lights. But it took quite a while of staring for them all to burn out. And then I was even more scared. I just sat there frozen, too terrified to get wood. Like it seriously took me 3 or 4 hours to work up the courage to walk back to my car, because that's about 3 miles I had to go. Terrifying, dude. Incredibly Shiny Shard said. Walking out of Taos Canyon from the hot springs with my buddies around midnight during a new moon. It's about 40 degrees, so pretty chilly, and we hear this mumbling in the dark ahead. As we approach, this scraggly man comes shuffling in bare feet down the trail. He had no flashlight, wearing filthy pinstripe blue pajamas and talking to himself incoherently. As my friend and I back up to the side of the narrow trail, I asked, "How's it going, man?" Another beautiful day, he said in a super cheery voice, and went right back to taking to himself. He continued down the trail into darkness. We hauled ass back to the cars where our other buddy was. She said she had watched him walking off the mess. MR Warmth said. One night when I was living in a small condo in Arizona, I woke up to a furtive, clicking sound at my bedroom metal grate over my sliding door to my walled-in patio. The wall was almost 7 feet high, and my neighbor's cat would jump in and eventually realize he was trapped, so he would scratch at the screen so I could help him or come out to pet him, which happened pretty often. Hearing the sound, I thought it was Mike, so I opened the slider without looking and looked down as I opened the grate. On the ground bumping into the grate were 30 or so palo verde beetles. Think a 5-inch roach with huge antennas, but they are not roaches, just crows. Several were attached in amplexus mating, making them look way bigger since they mate end to end. I quickly closed the grate, crushing a few, closed the slider and shut off the light. I guess they were attracted to the moisture in my potted garden plants I kept on the patio. I slept on the couch that night so I didn't hear them scratching at the grate, and by morning all but the few dead ones were gone. It was so gross. The next time Mike came by, I was much more cautious to see who was there first. Deus 505 said, "Finally I can contribute. I work in animal research and today a colleague mentioned that a new primate facility would be coming to our area. Always been interested in understanding the process, even though I won't want to do it long term. After I got home I took a nap that turned into about 2.5 hours of sleep until I awoke in sleep paralysis. The bathroom attached to my bedroom had the door about 80% shut and totally dark as there is no window in there. As I laid there unable to move, my right eye was open enough to see the bathroom door, which I became convinced had several large primates behind it. In a frantic haze, I decided I had to get up but couldn't move. All I could do was watch what I think were very mild hallucinations or possibly just the heightened suggestibility of the state I was in. Furry hunched figures shuffling behind the door, smaller primates crawling around the vanity lights, the occasional fingers around the door's edge. This sleep paralysis thing has happened to me before, but usually it is just confusing and frustrating. This is the first time it was terrifying." Check Babe Nessa Devil said, "I shared an apartment with 2 roommates. One Malay, one female. Me and the other girl slept in the same room, because we are both girls, and the guy had the other room. One night I couldn't sleep. The door opened and a guy came sneaking in. He then lifted the blanket of my friend's bed and jerked off onto her feet, wiped it off and walked away. I was too scared to say anything while it happened. But I told her the next day and we moved out that same day." I Transmogrify said, "Beautiful clear night in the suburbs of Baltimore in the 70s. I was a kid chasing lightning bugs, then I noticed a blue sphere in the sky. Small at first. A fraction of the diameter of the moon, but it grew larger in size. As it grew, I could see dark and light sections. The dark sections looked like craters. It kept growing and was many times larger than the moon. My father was drunk and couldn't tell me what it was. That was before the internet. All I could imagine was that a planet was rapidly approaching Earth and that we were all going to die. I fell asleep scared to death under my bed, and woke up the next morning just fine. My teacher in school explained that NASA had launched a rocket into the atmosphere that released a dye that allowed observers to see how the atmosphere moved. In the end, it wasn't scary at all. But while it was happening, I was sure I was going to die." Higoyes Clay said, "This happened when I was maybe 12-13ish. It was recently enough for cell phones, but they were bricks. I grew up surrounded mostly by farmland in a rural area. Not far from the suburbs and nearest city, but far enough that traffic was pretty sparse and foot traffic was basically non-existent. We could see our neighbors' houses on either side, maybe 1/4 mile down the street each direction, but the nearest house behind was around a mile or more through pretty dense woods. Nobody lived across the street for maybe 1/2 mile or more in either direction. Now that you have a feeling for the setting, on to the story. My parents and sister went to eat dinner in town one night and I stayed home. Our living room was all windows facing out of the back, and since we didn't exactly have neighbors out there, we didn't close the curtains. I was sitting on the couch watching TV in the living room, looked outside, and saw someone walking through the backyard. He was walking across the property parallel to the street, and stopped about dead center of the yard and just looked at the house. The lights were off, but the TV was on, so he could very likely see me seeing him. He just stood there. After what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds, I jumped up, grabbed the phone, and booked it to my parents' bedroom, also the location of the gun safe. As I was opening the safe, I called my mom and told her what was up. My dad grabbed the phone from her, told me to stay in the bedroom, load the 12 gauge, and wait for them to call back. He told me that if I heard a person and it wasn't them yelling telling me they were home, to shoot. They were maybe 5 minutes from home and would call when they were in the driveway. They got home, swept the whole backyard with the headlights when they pulled in, and nobody was to be seen. I, of course, never found out who it was or what they were doing, but they didn't belong where they were. That experience scared the living shit out of me then, and probably still would now. Punch Football said, "This actually happened a few nights ago. I was getting home late, around 1 a.m. with my dog, and I parked my car across the residential street to my house. I got out and we walked across the street. My dog started barking at nothing pretty excitedly. I didn't think much of it. We nearly made it to my lawn when this massive, electrical sounding explosion went off maybe a few blocks away, behind the next row of houses behind me. The sky lit up orange and yellow for a brief second. The sound and the shock of it made me duck to the ground. Then I proceeded to run inside. I live in a quiet neighborhood, so I'm not used to seeing or hearing anything that resembles a large explosion, but man, it was scary. Not exactly sure what caused it, some electrical malfunction outside, but it scared the living shit out of me and my dog seemed to telegraph it." Inaban She Bitch said, "We were driving home after visiting family that lived about 7 hours away. We had left late, so it was about midnight when we were still about an hour away from home. Coming up to an overpass on the highway, I noticed movement from the right side of the embankment, which was closest to me since I was sitting in the passenger seat. As we got closer, I realized it looked like a person, laying on their stomach on the ground. I thought maybe someone had gotten hit by a car and was hurt, but before I started to say anything to my dad, we got closer and I fully saw what was happening. It was a woman, wearing a tattered dress or longish tunic shirt. She was on her hands and feet, and was quickly crawling up the embankment towards the concrete underside of the overpass. Something about the way her limbs were moving and crawling freaked me out, so I just stared in shock and horror as we passed by her, as she continued to jerkily climb upwards into the darkness of the overpass. Freaking terrified me, and I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep until we got home. I don't like driving out that way past town anymore." Rock the Croc said, "I was camping at a primitive campsite with a family member about 9 years ago. We went during the week and upon entering the area, the person checking us in informed us we were the only people in the primitive section that night, which is about 4 miles away from the other non-primitive camping areas and any form of civilization. There was only one road to get in and out so we would see anyone headed our way. My family member fell asleep quickly, but I had gotten a weird feeling as the night got darker. No cars had drove on the road by us so I don't believe any humans were around. I could hear something crunching in the brush about 30 yards away, but hoped it was a deer as they are common in the area. As I was trying to be rational, telling myself there are no large predators besides coyotes in the area, something let out a terrifying scream roar like I've never heard before or since. It shook me to my core and wasn't close to sounds of a coyote, raccoon, bear, or even a human. My family member woke up in a commotion and we heard something running away heavily in the brush. We grabbed the essentials and sprinted to the car and drove around until morning." Edit. Well, lots of replies asking for more info about the sound. It was kind of middle range, not a shriek but not too deep either. It lasted pretty long, maybe 8 seconds if I had to guess. Didn't get an exact number as I was focused on not shitting myself in that moment. What really made it terrifying was the volume of it. I swear it rattled everything. This was in Ohio for those asking about native animals. The Point said, "Not me, but a good friend. Lived with his wife and kids and their German Shepherd in a 1-bedroom apartment. One night he's up late, reading the paper in the kitchen when his dog lets out a very low growl, the kind that you had to be right next to him to hear. But it was there. He tells the dog to be quiet, shuts all the lights in the apartment and slowly tiptoes to the peephole in his front door. And there looking back at him, right in the peephole, is a human eye. Because he has darkness behind him, the guy doesn't see him. Then he sees the guy look into the peepholes of his 2 next-door neighbors and realizes the guy is casing the places for a burglary. And that's when he lets him have it and screams, 'GTFO or I will let my German Shepherd loose on your ass.' And his dog goes absolutely nuts, barking like crazy and trying to pull the door open. The guy hightailed it out of there and that was the end of it." Jellyrocks 247 said, "I was 15, it was summer and I was about to go to sleep at around 3 a.m. Our house had no air conditioning so I slept in the living room with the windows open. I turned off all the lights and get ready to sleep on the couch. Sitting in the dark ready for bed I hear a beep. I sit up and see a blue light around the corner, which was the entrance to the hallway. It turned off for a moment, then turned on again, getting ever brighter. I felt that something was getting closer, so I got up and ran to my parents' room. May not sound weird, but there was nothing that could have made that light. I had turned everything off and it was blue. I felt as if something was there that day. As the light came closer, I knew I didn't want to met whatever it was attached to. Floored87 said, I lived in a pretty quiet neighborhood in Edinburgh and I'm a night owl. One night I heard a girl screaming. It sounded like it was coming from a few streets away. I had my window open, so I got up to get a better listen. She was screaming, "Somebody help me." And then I heard this popping sound. No screaming afterwards. I couldn't even remotely pinpoint where it came from. In hindsight, maybe I should have phoned the police anyway, even if all I could give them was I heard a girl screaming a few streets away and I have no idea where. I just figured at the time that there would have been actual witnesses since it was loud and in a heavily residential area. No way nobody closer wouldn't have seen or heard it. I checked the local news for a few days afterwards because I wondered if she had been shot. A girl being shot to death in Edinburgh would have made the front page. We have lots of crime just like any other city, but crimes like that are rare. There was nothing though. Maybe she lived but got sexually assaulted. Rapes are less likely to get into the news since unfortunately they are too common. If I hear something like that again, I will ring the police for sure. Maybe the girl was drunk, maybe it was just shenanigans, but she did sound genuinely terrified and like she was fleeing from an attacker. Definitely the most sinister thing I've heard late at night. DASF1304 said, this sounds very similar to phantom limb syndrome in people who lose an arm or a leg. The brain is unable to rationalize the trauma of no longer possessing an extension of itself that it has known to exist for years, and when that limb is gone, the brain can recreate the sensation of the limb being there. The effect is actually incredibly strong, able to make some feel for an extended period of time the sensation of having that limb in its entirety. This could be an explanation as to why this happened. Your brain, probably on autopilot if you were on your phone, was unable to reconcile the trauma of your cat being gone, and as such, recreated the sensation of your cat very vividly. Desperate Key 4944 said, back in college I lived on the bottom floor of a 2-story apartment building. Our apartment backed up to a park. For a few nights in a row we heard noises coming from the bushes behind our place. We wrapped it up to probably some raccoons or cats. There were a lot of cats that lived around the area. Then one morning we are getting ready to leave for the day and our upstairs neighbor informed us that a man had been less than 5 feet from our sliding glass door watching us and the upstairs neighbor threw water on him to scare him away. We moved out within the next 3 days. Years later I learned about a serial killer in that area that would stalk its victims at night before breaking in and killing them. Amangasimer said, oh man. This was so weird stupid. I was visiting my cousins and due to all of us wanting to watch a horror movie together, we were sleeping on mattresses in the living room. Of course we watched it late at night. It was a fairly inconsequential horror film. We watched, got spooked, laughed, turned off the DVD player and went to sleep. Movies like this have an average plot but their music is always scary AF for some reason, especially if it plays without context. Anyway, we are sound asleep and bang in the middle of the night. The haunting music from the movie starts to play. We all wake up upright, scared shitless. The movie was playing on TV. Switched it off at the speed of lightning and stayed alert until we naturally fell asleep. Turns out if the power goes out, the whole entire DVD just starts back up. Never happened again. It was probably a technical glitch but we didn't watch horror movies late at night on that DVD player again. Red Skull said, not seen per se, but heard. I was staffing summer camp, meaning sleeping in a tent all month. It was extremely hot one night, and I was not sleeping well at all. I tossed and turned for about 30 minutes before checking my phone. It was about 3 o'clock at night. Then, I heard what sounded like footprints walking up the trail the staff tents were positioned on, and I figured that it was a staffer heading to the bathroom. But the footsteps then began to walk around my tent. I was quite confused, and went to wake up my tent buddy. To no avail. The footsteps then returned back to in front of my tent, and then just stopped as if someone was just standing at the entrance to the tent. Now, I have no clue if my mind was playing tricks on me, but I was freaked the fuck out. After waiting about 10 minutes, I grabbed the brightest flashlight I had, as well as my clothes for the next day, and practically sprinted out my tent straight to the bathrooms, where I proceeded to shower for the next 3 hours until wake up. Why I left my tent when I was certain something was waiting outside of it, I have no clue. All I know is I was fucking scared and that shower was the best shower of my life. Electrical Carol 15 said. I woke up at 3 to 4 a.m. with my younger brother standing over me looking down at me. He looked like a shadow, but could still see the curves of his nose, ears, act like he was 3D. His back was to a nightlight he insisted on keeping plugged in every night, so it might have made sense that he looked like a silhouette. I was totally freaked out, obviously because my brother was staring at me in the middle of the night, so I quietly said, "Insert brother's name here." This MF raises his hand and is holding a kitchen knife. I scream and shut my eyes waiting to be stabbed. I was probably screaming for 5-ish seconds, felt like forever, and when I opened my eyes he was gone. Never heard footsteps or anything. My dad rushes into my room and asks why I'm screaming. I told him what happened, but here's the problem: my younger brother sleeps in a loft bed in our room. He was in the loft bed when my dad got into the room. This loft bed has several loose bolts, so whenever you touch it, let alone climb the ladder, you can hear it across the house. And I nor anyone else heard anything that sounded like it, and all the knives were downstairs in the kitchen knife block. Nothing like this has happened again. Yes, my dad remembers it, so it couldn't have been a dream. Was it a night terror? Am I haunted by my living younger brother's ghost? Unbearded Pedestrian said. On a rainy night a couple of months ago, our doorbell started going off at around midnight. I was already asleep, so my wife was the first to hear it. She was freaked out and came upstairs to get me. She woke me up with the comments, "The doorbell won't stop ringing. I think someone is at the door." I went downstairs to inspect the camera on the doorbell console. Nothing. Our neighborhood has had reported thieves breaking into houses, so we have another security camera mounted up higher, pointed towards the front door. The area where the doorbell button would be visible was obscured by a newly spun spider web. We couldn't see anything and the doorbell wouldn't stop ringing. I went to my house workshop and grabbed my most recently sharpened hatchet and put my shoes on. In the fastest motion that I could summon, I unlocked the door, flew outside, and shouted, "What do you want?" Nobody was there. We turned off the console and slept on edge the rest of the night. The landlord came over the next day and found that rainwater had gotten behind the button and had caused mayhem of the electronics. It was replaced shortly thereafter. Squirrel Carlton said. I was in my bathroom taking a massive shit, and afterwards I went to wash my hands and go back to sleep. That's when it happened. This shit brings chills to me. I'm standing in front of the sink, and I go to lower my head and lean forward a good bit to wash my hands. As I do this, in my peripheral, I can see my reflection not lowering its head or leaning, and it seemed the more I lowered my head and leaned forward, the more the features of the face began to blur, and the more a smile seemed to grow on the reflection. But it wasn't my smile, wasn't my mouth, wasn't my teeth. All of that was abnormally large and vibrant in color. This happened over the course of 2 seconds, and when my eyes snapped back to the mirror, my reflection was back to normal again. I instantly got extremely cold and extremely paranoid. Instantly. Not over the course of a few seconds of processing what I just saw, but instantly. As if something that was not my body was causing it. I left the bathroom and felt a very odd urge to go back in and specifically look in the mirror again. That was one of 2 paranormal experiences at the place. The house burned down a year later.